It started out like any other day. Work had been draining, the kind of day where deadlines felt like they were strangling me. So, I decided to leave a bit early, hoping to catch a break, maybe clear my head. The drive home was routine, just me and the low hum of the radio, not a single clue that my life was about to shift. Pulling into the driveway, nothing seemed out of place. The house was quiet, the kind of peaceful stillness you'd expect mid-afternoon. I pushed the front door open, and the faint aroma of something cooking drifted from the kitchen. Familiar, comforting, almost grounding. I set my bag down, thinking about nothing more than a hot cup of coffee to shake off the day. But as I walked into the kitchen, my eyes caught something on the counter that didn't belong there. A lighter. Not just any lighter, though. Sleek, silver, with the initials MD engraved on the side. My chest tightened. It was the exact lighter I had given my best friend, Matt, years ago during a camping trip. I remembered his laugh when I handed it to him, teasing me about how fancy it was for a simple weekend outdoors. But he kept it, said it was a good luck charm. So why was it here? In my kitchen. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand, flipping it over like I needed to confirm it was real. My wife, Emma, stood at the sink, casually rinsing vegetables, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "is this Matt's lighter?" She glanced over her shoulder, barely looking at it, then shrugged with a nonchalant smile. "Oh yeah. I found it in the car. He must have left it there the last time you drove him somewhere. I've been meaning to give it back." Her voice was steady, relaxed. Too relaxed. For a second, I almost believed her. I nodded, set the lighter back on the counter like it didn't mean anything, and forced myself to leave the kitchen. But something didn't sit right. Her explanation felt too smooth, too rehearsed. I hadn't driven Matt anywhere in months. Maybe longer. And even if I had, why would his lighter just be sitting openly on the counter like that? Why wasn't it tucked away, forgotten in a glove box or under a seat? The details didn't add up. That night over dinner, Emma was her usual self, chatty, laughing about work, asking about my day. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was stuck on that lighter. Then, as if the universe wanted to keep the suspense going, she casually mentioned she had dinner plans with some colleagues later that evening. "Mind if I head out for a couple of hours?" she asked with that easy smile of hers. "Of course not," I replied, keeping my face neutral. Not long after she left, my phone buzzed. It was Matt. He was apologizing for canceling our loose plans to hang out, saying work had popped up last minute. His tone was casual, but the timing hit me like a punch. Emma out for dinner, and Matt suddenly too busy to meet? This wasn't the first time their schedules had oddly overlapped. I sat there, the house too quiet, that uneasy feeling growing stronger. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something was off. The lighter, the weirdly timed plans, the way she shrugged it off, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was trying to solve. Later that night, Emma came home in a great mood, like nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, talked about her dinner, and scrolled through her phone while we settled into bed. As she turned over, her phone lit up with a notification. A name I didn't recognize flashed on the screen, definitely not a colleague or friend she'd ever mentioned. She noticed me glance at it, quickly picked it up, and dismissed the message with a light laugh. "Work stuff," she said, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Her reaction was too smooth, too polished. My gut twisted with a mix of suspicion and dread. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I realized this wasn't just about a misplaced lighter anymore. It was something bigger, something I couldn't ignore. And that's when everything started to unravel. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. No more brushing things off or telling myself I was overthinking. I needed to know the truth, no matter how ugly it was. That nagging feeling had rooted itself deep, and I wasn't going to let it fester without answers. Emma was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made breakfast, completely at ease. You'd never guess that beneath our picture-perfect life, cracks were starting to form. She smiled at me over her coffee cup, her eyes warm and familiar, but all I could see was the shadow of doubt creeping in. As I sat there, pretending to scroll through my phone, she mentioned she had to head out to a nearby town after lunch for a client meeting. Her voice was casual, light, like it was just another item on her to-do list. But to me, it felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing that line in her head. I nodded, feigning indifference. But inside, I was already planning my next move. When she left the house, I gave it a few minutes. My heart was racing, palms slightly sweaty as I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close. The last thing I needed was for her to catch me tailing her. This wasn't some action movie. I was just a guy desperate for the truth. She drove toward the city, nothing unusual at first. Just a typical route, the kind of drive we'd taken together countless times. But then she pulled into a small parking lot outside a quiet cafe on the edge of town. I parked far enough away to stay hidden but close enough to keep an eye on her. She didn't get out of the car. Instead, she sat there, glancing at her phone, typing something quickly, then looking around like she was waiting for someone. My gut tightened. A few minutes later, another car pulled in. My heart dropped. It was Matt's car. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, watching as he stepped out. He looked around briefly, then walked straight to her car. She unlocked the door without hesitation, and he slid into the passenger seat like it was the most natural thing in the world. They just sat there, talking. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but their body language said enough. Leaning in slightly, heads tilted just a bit too close. My mind raced with all the possibilities of what was being said, what had already happened. I wanted to get out of the car, march over there, and demand answers. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. After a while, they pulled out of the parking lot together. I followed, my heart pounding with every turn. They eventually drove into a residential area, pulling into the driveway of a house tucked behind tall fences. Not Matt's house. Not even close. I parked a few blocks away, just within view, my heart thudding like a drum against my ribs. They disappeared behind the gates, and I was left there, alone with my thoughts. The hours crawled by. I kept hoping they'd come out quickly, that maybe this was all some innocent misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. Eventually, I drove to Matt's house, needing confirmation. Maybe he'd be there, and this would all make sense. But his place was dark, empty. I didn't even bother knocking. I knew exactly where he was. Driving back, everything clicked into place. The lighter, the overlapping schedules, the secret meetings. It wasn't just a coincidence. It never was. When I got home, Emma was already there, acting like nothing had happened. She told me about her client meeting, threw in some details about traffic to make it sound real. I nodded along, pretending to believe her. But inside, something had broken. The doubt was no longer a shadow, it was a storm. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my head. Every smile, every laugh, every time I'd told myself I was just being paranoid. Not anymore. I knew the truth was out there, hiding just beneath the surface. And I was going to find it. The next day felt different. There was this unspoken tension hanging in the air, thick and suffocating, though Emma carried on like everything was normal. She moved through her morning routine with the same ease, but I could see it now, the small tells. A flicker of hesitation when she smiled, the way her eyes darted just a second too long when I asked simple questions. Maybe she sensed it too. Maybe she knew I was no longer the clueless husband she thought I was. Over breakfast, she casually slid a small piece of paper onto the counter. It was a list, names scribbled in her neat handwriting, supposedly people she was planning to meet over the next few days. "Just in case I forget who I'm supposed to catch up with," she said, her voice light, almost playful. I glanced at it, my eyes skimming over the names until one jumped out at me, Lindsay. I'd never heard that name before. Emma loved to talk about her friends, her colleagues, her endless stream of work acquaintances. But Lindsay, that name had never come up. I didn't react, though. Just nodded and sipped my coffee, pretending like I didn't care. But inside, I was boiling. Later that morning, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands were shaking, part adrenaline, part fear of what I might find. I scrolled through her contacts, and there it was, Lindsay. But the number didn't look right. It was incomplete, like someone had typed it in a hurry or didn't care if it seemed legit. No messages. No call history. Just a name and a half-baked attempt at a cover. She wasn't even trying that hard to hide it. I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it. The rage was simmering now, a steady pulse beneath my skin. She thought I was a fool. She thought she could play me like some oblivious puppet, smiling to my face while sneaking around behind my back. By evening, I was a ticking time bomb. I sat in the living room, flipping through a magazine I wasn't actually reading when she appeared from the bedroom. And that's when I saw it, the final crack in the facade. She was dressed like she was going clubbing in Vegas, not meeting a colleague. A short skirt she hadn't worn in years, a tight top that clung to her like it was painted on, high heels clicking against the hardwood floor with every smug step. Her makeup was flawless, her hair done up like she was starring in her own little movie. I stared at her, the magazine forgotten on my lap. "Where are you going dressed like that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though I could feel the tension building in my chest like a loaded gun. She flashed me a grin, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Out. Don't wait up," she said, her tone dripping with false cheer. And then she did it. She bent down to tie her shoelace, her back to me, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just given me a glimpse of something that shattered whatever doubt I had left. Peeking from her bag, just barely visible, was Matt's lighter. The same damn lighter. She hadn't found it in the car. She'd had it all along. My vision went red for a second. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. But I didn't say a word. She grabbed her bag, tossed me a lazy wave, and walked out the door, leaving nothing but the echo of her heels and a silence that felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. I sat there for a minute, staring at the door. Then I grabbed my keys and followed her. I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. I waited just long enough to make sure she was a few streets ahead, then I slipped out, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every little sound feel louder than it should be. My footsteps on the pavement, the soft click of my car door shutting, the engine's low growl as I pulled away from the curb. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close. The streetlights stretched long shadows across the road, flickering every now and then like they were mocking me. She drove with the ease of someone who had done this before, her car gliding through familiar turns, not a single pause of hesitation. This wasn't a nervous rendezvous. She was confident, sure of herself, like she knew she'd never get caught. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the driveway of a house I didn't recognize. It was large, tucked behind high fences with a sleek, modern look, definitely not Matt's place. My mind spun. If not Matt, then who? I parked a block away, killed the headlights, and waited, my heart thudding like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. She got out of the car, smoothing down her skirt, adjusting her top like she was preparing for a show. She glanced around briefly, but not with the paranoia of someone hiding a secret. More like someone who knew she'd gotten away with it so many times before that she didn't even have to try. The front door of the house opened, and that's when I saw him. It wasn't Matt. It was Jake. Matt's boss. I'd met Jake a few times at office parties. Sharp suit, smug grin, the kind of guy who walked into a room like he owned it. Always flashing his wealth like it was part of his personality, always a little too smooth with his words. But I'd never given him much thought beyond that. Until now. He stepped outside, looking like he'd just walked off the cover of some overpriced men's magazine, and greeted Emma with a smile that made my stomach churn. It wasn't friendly. It was familiar. Intimate. She walked up to him like she belonged there. No hesitation. No guilt. They hugged, not the quick, polite kind you give a friend, but the slow, lingering kind that says more than words ever could. I felt something inside me snap. But I didn't move. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, and hit record. I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof. My suspicions weren't enough. I needed to see it, to capture it, to hold it in my hands like a loaded weapon. They stood there for a minute, talking, laughing like this was just another day in their perfect little world. Then he put his hand on the small of her back, guiding her inside like she was a prized possession. The door closed behind them. I sat there in the dark, phone in my lap, staring at the now empty porch. My chest felt hollow, like someone had carved out my heart and left nothing but echoes. I'd been wrong about everything. It wasn't Matt. It had never been Matt. All the late nights, the unexplained messages, the overlapping schedules. I'd been piecing together the wrong puzzle. The real picture had been right in front of me the whole time, hidden in plain sight. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been an hour. Could have been 3. Time didn't feel real anymore. I replayed the video over and over, watching the way she smiled at him, the way he looked at her like she was his. Eventually, I drove home, the empty roads blurring past me like I was in a daze. When I walked through the door, the house felt different, colder, smaller, like the walls were closing in. I sat down at the kitchen table, the video still playing on a loop in my mind. This was more than betrayal. It was the death of the life I thought I had. And I wasn't going to let it end like this. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, the glow of the screen reflecting off the cold, empty coffee cup I kept refilling but never drinking. Every time I hit play, I hoped it would somehow look different, that maybe I'd see something I'd missed, something that could explain it all away. But the truth was right there, unblinking, undeniable. Emma didn't come home until the early hours of the morning. I heard the car door shut, her footsteps light and casual as she walked up the porch. She came in like nothing had happened, tossing her keys on the table, humming softly to herself. The audacity of it made my blood boil. She peeked into the kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her tone dripping with that fake sweetness I used to believe was genuine. I forced a smile. "Just had a lot on my mind." She nodded, completely unaware of the war raging inside me, then disappeared down the hall to the bedroom, leaving me alone again with my thoughts. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I was going to play the game. For the next few days, I acted like nothing had changed. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day when she got home, even laughed at her dumb stories about work. It was like wearing a mask, pretending everything was fine while underneath, I was sharpening the knife. But I needed more. Proof wasn't enough. I wanted to understand how deep this went, how long she'd been lying to me, how many layers of deceit she'd built around her perfect little life. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Matt. When he picked up, his voice was casual, friendly even, like nothing was wrong. I told him I needed to talk, face to face. No excuses. No delays. Just us. An hour later, I was standing in his living room, staring at the man I used to call my best friend. He knew. The second he saw my face, he knew. "Hey man, what's—" I didn't let him finish. I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall so hard the picture frames rattled. "How long?" I growled, my face inches from his. His eyes went wide, panic flashing across his face. "What are you talking about?" I tightened my grip. "Don't play dumb. I know about Emma. And I know about Jake." The color drained from his face, and for a second, I thought he might actually faint. He sagged against the wall, his hands raised in surrender. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He broke. It poured out of him in a messy, stuttering confession. No, he wasn't sleeping with Emma. But yes, he knew. He'd known for months. He'd seen them together, at work events, in parking lots, even once at a hotel when he was there for a meeting. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. He rubbed his face, avoiding my eyes. "Because Jake's my boss. He found out I knew and he made it clear that if I said anything, I'd be out of a job." Coward. That's all I saw when I looked at him. A pathetic, spineless coward who let me drown in lies because he was too afraid to stand up. I left without another word. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought it might snap in half. I wasn't even angry anymore. Anger was too small for what I felt. This was something colder, something sharp. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had a plan. This wasn't going to be a screaming match in the kitchen. It wasn't going to be a dramatic breakup where she cried and I packed my bags. No. I was going to destroy them. Every single one. The morning light felt different, colder, sharper, like it was slicing through the thin veil of normalcy I'd been holding on to. But today wasn't about pretending anymore. Today was the day I'd been building toward, the day I'd pull the rug out from under both Emma and Jake and watch them fall flat on their faces. I didn't say much to Emma that morning. Just the usual small talk over coffee, pretending to care about her plans for the day while mentally replaying my own. She left the house with that same confident smile, completely unaware that her world was about to implode. As soon as the door shut, I grabbed the folder I'd put together. Screenshots of messages, photos of her with Jake, the video I'd recorded of them outside his house. Proof stacked like bricks, solid and undeniable. But I wasn't stopping there. I'd spent the past few days digging deeper into Jake's life. Thanks to Matt, who, after our confrontation, was eager to make amends, I'd uncovered more than just an affair. There were shady business deals, financial fraud, and enough dirt to ruin not just his reputation but his entire career. By noon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, laying everything out. The divorce papers were drafted with ruthless precision. No assets for Emma. No claims to the house. Nothing. The evidence was airtight. My lawyer nodded, clearly impressed, not with me, but with how thoroughly I'd dismantled the life Emma thought she had. Next, I sent an anonymous package to Jake's company's HR department. Inside, the folder of his financial crimes, neatly organized with dates, figures, and proof of his affair with an employee's wife. Just a little bonus to make sure his personal mess spilled into his professional life. By evening, it was time for the final act. Emma came home like she always did, keys jingling, her fake cheerful voice calling out, "Hey, babe!" She found me in the living room, sitting calm, collected, with the folder on the coffee table. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing it with mild curiosity. I didn't say a word, just nodded toward the folder. She picked it up, flipping through the pages, her smile fading with each turn. I watched her face shift, confusion, disbelief, then fear. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached the last page, the divorce papers. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely holding together. I leaned back, my face blank, my voice cold. "Your reality." She opened her mouth to argue, to spin another web of lies, but I cut her off. "Don't bother. It's over. Sign the papers." Her eyes darted around like she was searching for some kind of escape, some crack she could slip through, but there was none. The walls were closing in, and I was the one holding the key. She didn't argue. She knew it was pointless. She signed the papers with shaky hands, her breath ragged, the confident woman I once knew reduced to nothing more than regret in human form. When she was done, I stood up and looked her dead in the eye. "You've got 1 hour to pack your things and get out." She stared at me, her face a mess of anger and disbelief, but I didn't care. I'd already mourned the loss of what we had. This wasn't grief. This was justice. She left without another word, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, the house felt lighter. The next day, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Jake had been fired. His accounts were frozen, an investigation launched into his business dealings. His perfect little empire crumbled in less than 24 hours. I didn't feel victorious. This wasn't a win. But it was closure. Months later, I'd hear through mutual friends that Emma tried reaching out, desperate to explain, to reconnect. I never responded. I didn't need to. She'd already said everything I needed to hear the day she thought I'd never find out. And now I was free. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.